Picture the Sahara Desert. What comes to mind? I'm guessing an endless ocean of sand, right? A place with a scorching sun and this deep, profound silence. For most of us, yeah, that's the very definition of a desert. But what if I told you that image is just a tiny piece of the real story? What if, buried beneath all that sand, there's a completely different world, a lost world just bursting with life? Because that is exactly what science is uncovering right now. So today, we're going to peel back the layers of sand and time to reveal one of the greatest, most dramatic environmental transformations in the history of our planet. The Sahara we know today, yeah, it's a symbol of desolation. But just 10,000 years ago, which is a blink of an eye in geologic time, it was a vibrant green landscape. We're talking sprawling grasslands and absolutely massive freshwater lakes. This era actually has a name, the Green Sahara. Or, if you want to get formal, the African Humid Period. And this isn't some myth or legend. It was a real historical period when North Africa looked completely, and I mean completely different. So, how can we be so sure about all this? Where's the proof of this lost green paradise? Well, it turns out the clues have been hiding for millennia, some in plain sight and others deep beneath the sand. Let's start with the climate. By analyzing ancient sediment cores, scientists have figured out that the rainfall wasn't just a little bit higher, it was up to 10 times higher than it is today. That's just a staggering difference, more than enough to completely reshape an entire continent. And all that water? Well, it brought life, not just plants, but massive animals. Just try to imagine hippos, elephants, giraffes, even crocodiles roaming across what is now central Libya or Algeria. This wasn't just a slightly greener desert. This was a full-blown savanna ecosystem. And this is so cool. Modern satellite imagery lets us peer right through the sand, and it reveals the ghosts of ancient river systems and these vast lake beds. The largest one, they call it Lake Megachad, was once the size of modern-day Germany. An inland sea, smack in the middle of the Sahara. But maybe the most compelling evidence of all comes from the people who actually lived there. Dotted across the Sahara, archaeologists have found over 15,000 prehistoric rock paintings and engravings. It's like this massive outdoor art gallery left behind by a forgotten civilization. And these are not just simple sketches. No, they're like windows into a lost world. They show us scenes of everyday life. You've got hunters with their bows, people dancing, and these huge herds of cattle, which tells us they were actually sophisticated herders. It's a whole civilization, frozen in time, painted right there on the stone. You know, one of the most astonishing images of all are these pictures of people in boats. Just let that sink in for a second. Boats. Traveling through waters in the middle of what is now one of the driest regions on the entire planet. It's just wild. So this vibrant world, it existed for thousands of years, but then it vanished. And that leads us to the central mystery of this whole story. What happened to the Green Sahara? The timeline here is just so dramatic. For thousands of years, this green period flourished. But then, around 5,000 years ago, a super rapid and catastrophic climate shift began. The rains just stopped, the lakes dried up, and the sand took over. So what could possibly trigger such a complete and sudden environmental collapse? You know, this question has been the subject of some really intense scientific debate for decades now. There are a few big theories out there. One points to a totally natural cyclical wobble in the Earth's orbit that basically shifted the monsoon rains further south. Another one suggests that maybe humans, with their livestock and overgrazing, kicked off a feedback loop that sped up the whole desertification process. Honestly, the most likely answer is probably a combination of both. For centuries, that's where the story ended. A lost world, buried forever under the sand. But today, incredible new technology is letting us write the next chapter and finally solve some of the Sahara's oldest secrets. Just imagine this, discovering a powerful kingdom that actually thrived after the desert had already returned. A whole civilization that figured out how to build cities in a wasteland with no rivers, no lakes, no surface water at all. A people pretty much lost to history. Well, meet the Garamantes. They were discovered, mostly by accident, in southern Libya. And this was a highly advanced civilization that engineered an incredible solution to living in the desert. They mined fossil water from deep underground to irrigate their crops. Their very existence is completely rewriting the history of the region. And the Garamantes are just the beginning. Using tools like ground-penetrating radar and high-res satellite images, researchers are now mapping entire networks of structures hidden beneath the sand. Lost settlements, ancient roads, thousands of tombs, and those ingenious underground irrigation canals. So, what does all of this tell us? Well, it forces us to see the Sahara not as this empty, dead void, but as a landscape of memory. One that has preserved the stories of all the worlds it buried. And this, right here, is the ultimate takeaway. For most of human history, the Sahara wasn't the Great Barrier we see it as today. It was the exact opposite. It was a bridge. Back in its green phase, it was this thriving corridor where people, ideas, and cultures moved around freely. It was a historic crossroads that connected these vast regions, shaping how civilizations developed from the shores of the Mediterranean all the way to the heart of West Africa. You know, after millennia of silence, the desert is finally starting to speak again. The secrets are coming to the surface, piece by incredible piece. And it leaves us with one final tantalizing question. As this ancient landscape wakes up, what other lost worlds is it just waiting to reveal?
I mean, just try to picture it. A thriving urban society just rising up out of the sand, miles and miles from any river or sea. For centuries, historians pretty much thought it was a myth, just a legend of desert ghosts. But the thing is, the Garamantes weren't just surviving in the Sahara, they had completely mastered it. Which brings up the big question, right? How on earth did they pull that off?
And yeah, that is the central mystery we're going to unravel today. It's the question that stumped historians for generations. A powerful, complex kingdom in one of the most inhospitable places on the entire planet, it just seems completely impossible. Okay, so to really get our heads around why it seems so impossible, we first need to understand the sheer scale of what they accomplished, and just how extreme their environment really was.
You see, this just completely shatters that old idea that the Garamantes were just some simple, wandering nomads. I mean, no way. They had all the hallmarks of a complex, settled civilization. We're talking cities, a ruling class, incredibly sophisticated infrastructure, the whole shebang.
And they did all of this while dealing with this. 55 degrees Celsius. That's 131 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not just hot, that is brutally, dangerously hot. Building a city in those conditions is one thing, but building an entire kingdom, that's on a whole other level.
So that brings us back to the ultimate problem, the water, or the lack of it. How did they solve it? Well, the answer wasn't magic. It was a feat of pure engineering genius, and it was hidden right under their feet the whole time.
This is the key to absolutely everything. The Fagara. The easiest way to think of it is like a man-made underground river. It's this incredibly clever system they designed to tap into groundwater deep, deep beneath the desert and then bring it all the way to the surface. And here's the genius part. It all used gravity, no pumps, and, crucially, it meant they wouldn't lose a single drop to evaporation in that blazing sun.
And you have to understand, this was a monumental undertaking. We're talking about workers descending into total darkness in that suffocating heat, carving out hundreds of miles of these gently sloping tunnels, all by hand. Gravity did all the heavy lifting, creating this hidden, totally reliable water supply. It's amazing. Even today, satellite images show these shafts as these long dotted lines stretching across the desert. They're like the buried veins of a lost civilization. And the result of all that incredible engineering, it was completely transformative. With a steady supply of fresh water, they turned barren desert into fertile farmland. They were growing all this stuff, wheat, barley, dates, even grapes, supporting tens of thousands of people right in the middle of nowhere.
So, with their survival totally secured by the Fagaratas, the Garamantes were now free to build a powerful and wealthy society. They became masters not just of water, but of the entire Central Sahara.
I mean, just look at the scale of their kingdom. a capital city, Garma, with a population that rivaled a lot of ancient cities. And it was surrounded by 8 other major towns and nearly 600 smaller settlements. This wasn't some outpost. This was a sprawling, organized, and populous kingdom. And this right here is a really crucial point that completely reframes how we should look at ancient history. For a long, long time, ancient African civilizations were kind of dismissed as primitive, but the archaeological evidence from the Garamantes just proves that's completely wrong. These people were sophisticated architects and builders, on par with, and in some cases even exceeding, their European contemporaries.
And get this, their location, which on the surface looks like a huge weakness, was actually their greatest economic strength. They controlled the trans-Saharan trade routes. They became the essential middlemen, literally the gateway between the Mediterranean world and all the wealth of sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, that control brought them immense riches and, inevitably, enemies.
This is how the ancient Greeks saw them, through the eyes of the historian Herodotus. Not as farmers or builders, but as these swift, mysterious desert raiders. This reputation for being absolute masters of the desert landscape, well, that's what defined them in the eyes of the outside world. So when the Roman army finally marched into their territory, they were in for a massive shock. I mean, they came expecting to find scattered, nomadic tribes living in huts. Instead, they were confronted with a fortified capital city, multi-story buildings, and these vast stretches of green, fertile farmland. Their intelligence was completely and utterly wrong.
Now, the Romans did manage to conquer Garama for a short time, but they just couldn't hold it. And why? Because the Garamantes used the desert itself as a weapon. Their light chariots, their secret knowledge of hidden water sources, their lightning-fast hit-and-run tactics, they completely outmaneuvered the heavy, slow Roman legions. In the end, the Romans weren't defeated by a bigger army, but by a much, much smarter one. So, what happened to this incredible desert kingdom? How does an advanced civilization like this just vanish? Well, their story ends with a really tragic and powerful irony.
You see, the Fagara system that had given them life for centuries, it was finite. They were basically mining water that wasn't being replenished. So, by constantly tapping those underground aquifers, they slowly but surely lowered the water table. Their lifeblood, the very thing that made them great, began to dry up. And as the water disappeared, their fields died, their cities emptied out, and the desert just reclaimed everything. They didn't fall in some great epic war. They just faded away in silence. For more than 1,000 years, they were almost completely forgotten. It wasn't until 20th century archaeology, and especially modern satellite imaging, that we could finally see the true, breathtaking scale of their incredible civilization. And so today, the Garamantes have rightfully been restored to their place in history. They weren't just myths or desert ghosts. They were pioneers. They were brilliant engineers. And they were the rulers of a powerful kingdom that completely rewrites our understanding of what was possible in the ancient world. You know, the story of the Garamantes proves that entire chapters of human history can be buried and just forgotten. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? As our technology gives us all these new ways to look at our own world, what other incredible stories are still out there, just waiting beneath the sand to be told?
A massive art gallery, right? But it's hidden deep inside the world's largest hot desert, and it holds the secrets to a lost world, a time when the Sahara wasn't a desert at all. Nope, it was a vibrant green paradise. You know, when the first explorers stumbled upon this place, Tassili, Niger, and Algeria, they were just, well, completely blown away. The sheer scale, the importance of it all, they called it the Louvre of the Sahara. And honestly, it's the perfect name. Imagine walking through an ancient, open-air museum that stretches for over 70,000 square kilometers. It's just mind-boggling. And right there, that's the core mystery we're diving into. Think about the Sahara you know. What comes to mind? Sand, sun, maybe a whole lot of silence, right? But then you look at what these ancient artists painted on those very same rocks, and it's a totally different world. A world with flowing rivers, huge herds of cattle, and bustling communities of people. How is that even possible? And look, we're not talking about just a few little drawings here and there. Nope. Archaeologists have found and documented over 15,000 of these paintings and carvings. Think about that. Every single one is like a precious window, a single snapshot from a movie about a world that's just gone. All right, so to really get this story, we've got to go back, way back. We're starting with the oldest and honestly the weirdest art period they found at Tassili. This timeline right here, That's our roadmap for this journey. We're kicking things off 10,000 years ago with these strange roundhead figures. Then we'll jump into the Golden Age, the pastoral period. After that, we'll see how things change during the horse and warrior era. And finally, we'll watch as the desert claims everything for good. So yeah, that's the big question for this first era, isn't it? Who or what were these bizarre figures? What made these ancient people go deep into these sandstone caves and paint them? I mean, just look at them. These figures are, well, they're otherworldly. They've got these massive, featureless heads. Their bodies look like they're just floating, totally weightless. Some even have what looks like halos. It's unlike pretty much anything else we see in prehistoric art. There's this one famous painting. It shows a gigantic roundhead figure just towering over these tiny little humans, almost like it's giving a blessing or something. So strange. So what in the world are they? The honest answer? We don't really know for sure. The theories are all over the place. Could they be gods, spirits of nature, maybe shamans in some kind of ritual trance? And yeah, of course, some people have suggested, aliens. But that idea is pretty much dismissed by mainstream science. The truth is, these figures are a window into a complex spiritual world that's just lost to us now. Okay, so fast forward a few thousand years, the climate starts to change, and you can see it happening right there on the cave walls. The art changes with it. Those mystical, strange figures, they start to disappear, and they're replaced by these incredibly vivid scenes of daily life in a world that, honestly, you would never, ever recognize as the Sahara. These artists, they just painted what they saw every day. And what they saw were animals that absolutely need tons of water and green stuff to live. I'm talking hippos wallowing in rivers, giraffes munching on tall trees, even crocodiles. This wasn't some fantasy. This was real life. It was a historical record, proving this place was a thriving savanna. And the art from this time, wow, it gives us these amazing, intimate little snapshots of their society. You can see people herding these massive herds of cattle. You see women preparing meals, kids playing around their villages. It's this beautiful, detailed picture of a comfortable, community-focused life. This wasn't just about surviving day to day. These people were thriving. And that right there, that's the key takeaway. All this detail shows us a society that had plenty. They had abundance. They weren't just struggling to find their next meal. They had the time and the safety to build a rich culture, to make art, to dance, to celebrate life. This was it. This was the golden age of the Green Sahara. But, of course, that green paradise couldn't last forever. A huge, irreversible climate shift began. It was the end of what scientists call the African humid period. And once again, the rock art tells the story. It becomes this heartbreakingly accurate history book, showing a society under incredible stress as their entire world just vanished around them. You can see the change so clearly in the art. The most important animal isn't the peaceful cow anymore. Now it's the horse, a symbol of speed, of movement, of war. Those peaceful scenes of daily life, they get replaced by images of warriors, chariots, and battles. Life wasn't settled and abundant anymore. It was mobile, chaotic, and driven by conflict over resources that were disappearing fast. And then everything started to collapse, and it happened fast. The very lifeblood of their world, the rivers, the lakes that fed the grasslands, they just disappeared. And not just for a season. They were gone for good. Once the water was gone, the grasslands that fed their huge herds, they turned to dust. The entire foundation of their way of life just crumbled right out from under them. Suddenly, the choice was simple: get out or die. So people scattered. They migrated in every direction. North towards the Mediterranean, east towards the Nile. The Sahara became silent. And Tassili, it became a graveyard of memories. So, after all that, what's the legacy of these thousands of paintings? What are they telling us today? What is this last voice from a lost world trying to say? When you get right down to it, the art of Tassili is the memory of the desert itself. It's the hard, undeniable proof that this huge expanse of sand was once a cradle of life, that it was home to complex societies, people with rich cultures, preserved by the very same dryness that destroyed their world. And that is the real power of Tassili. It's better than any history book. These stone walls tell the whole story, from start to finish. From the mysterious beginnings with the Roundheads, through the vibrant life of the cattle herders, all the way to the final, desperate struggles of the warriors, every single chapter is right there for us to read. You know what? The story might not be over. A huge part of the Tassili Plateau is so remote, so rugged, that it's still completely unmapped. And archaeologists? They're pretty much convinced that there are thousands more undiscovered paintings still hiding out there in those deep canyons. And that kind of leaves us with one final big question. What other secrets from our planet's past? What other lost worlds are still out there, written on stone walls, just waiting for someone to find them?
When you think of the Sahara, you probably picture this endless, empty ocean of sand, right? But what if I told you that's just the very last chapter of a much bigger, wetter, and way more incredible story?
For generations, this was just a known fact. The Sahara was a vast, unchanging wasteland. But that idea, that perception, it couldn't have been more wrong. The reality, hidden just under all that sand, flips everything we thought we knew on its head.
And here's the secret. We're not talking about a few small streams or some hidden oases. We are talking about the ghosts of massive water systems, ancient river channels, and mega lakes that once defined the entire continent. A green Sahara that was just buzzing with life.
So how in the world do you find a lost river that's buried under millions of tons of sand? For decades, there were clues here and there, but the big picture was missing. Turns out the answer wasn't found by digging in the dirt at all.
Nope, it came from way up above. In the early 2000s, NASA aimed its space-based radar at the Sahara, and this tech basically gave them a kind of X-ray vision. It let them peel back the sand like a blanket and see the ancient landscape that was frozen in time right underneath.
And what they saw was just staggering. I mean, look at this. These weren't just little trickles of water. They found super rivers, huge arteries carving their way across North Africa, some as big as the Nile. They were feeding these enormous inland seas. And of course, they were the lifeblood for civilizations we're only now starting to rediscover. To really wrap your head around the sheer scale of this, let's zoom in on two of the most spectacular examples that the satellites helped us map out. These things weren't just rivers, they were continental-scale water systems. Okay, so first up, meet the Tamarasset River. If this river was flowing today, it would easily be one of the top 10 longest rivers on the entire planet. Just imagine that. A river system starting way up in the mountains of Morocco and Algeria, flowing all the way across Mauritania and emptying into the Atlantic.
And here's where it gets really cool. This discovery solves old archaeological mysteries. For years, people were puzzled by all this ancient rock art in the middle of the Sahara, showing hippos and crocodiles. Well, the Tamanrasset is the answer. People lived along its banks, they fished, they hunted. That art wasn't fantasy, it was a real memory of their world.
Now let's talk about the second giant. And I want you to just think about that number for a second. 400,000 square kilometers. That is bigger than the entire country of Germany. It's almost the size of California. And it was all one single body of fresh water.
This was Lake Megachad. And this comparison right here, wow, it really puts its catastrophic disappearance into perspective, doesn't it? What used to be a vast inland sea is now just this tiny, shrinking fraction of what it once was. It's a pretty stark reminder of how dramatically and how fast a climate can just completely shift.
But the story doesn't even end there with dried-up rivers, because deep underground, the Sahara is still hiding water. We're talking about massive aquifers filled with fossil water that's been trapped for tens of thousands of years. So, beneath one of the driest places on Earth, you have one of the largest freshwater reserves on the planet. The irony is just incredible. So what did all this water mean for people? Well, once scientists had these new river maps from space, archaeologists suddenly had a treasure map. They knew exactly where to start looking for signs of life. And sure enough, wherever those ancient rivers flowed, they found it.
And the evidence they uncovered is it's overwhelming. I mean, check this out. It's not just stone tools and pottery. We're talking ancient fishing hooks, burial mounds, even the remains of prehistoric boats. These aren't just scattered artifacts. They are the echoes of entire communities that lived and thrived along these now vanished shorelines.
And they didn't just survive here. They flourished for millennia. They built cultures. They created societies. And then, in what is basically a geological blink of an eye, their entire world just ended. The sand came and completely erased it all from the map.
So what happened? How did it all just disappear? Well, the most important thing to understand is that this wasn't some slow, gradual decline. The death of the Green Sahara was a rapid, dramatic, and frankly terrifying climate event.
This timeline really shows you just how fast it all went down. A tiny wobble in the Earth's orbit weakened the monsoons that were feeding all those rivers. And within just a few centuries, we're talking a handful of human generations, the rain stopped, and the rivers that had defined life for thousands of years just vanished.
And here is maybe the most mind-bending fact of all. Despite everything we've found so far, scientists estimate that over 90% of these ancient river networks are still completely buried and totally unexplored. The Sahara is still holding on to most of its secrets.
But that's all changing. This story of discovery is far from over. In fact, you could say we're entering a new golden age of Saharan exploration, and it's all being driven by technology that lets us finally see the unseen.
I mean, just look at these tools. We're way beyond just finding the riverbeds now. We can use LiDAR to actually see through layers of sand, use infrared to spot buried structures, and ground-penetrating radar to map out entire underground systems. We can even create 3D models of what these ancient landscapes actually looked like. We are just beginning to read the history that's written beneath the sand.
And that really brings us to this powerful final idea. The desert isn't a void. It's an archive. It's a museum of forgotten water, lost civilizations, and dramatic climate change. All of it perfectly preserved under this giant blanket of sand.
The Sahara remembers everything. We are only now just learning how to listen. Its buried rivers have already completely rewritten the history of Africa. So the final question isn't about what we've already found. It's about everything that's still down there, waiting. What else is it waiting to tell us? Imagine a lost world, one with powerful kings, sprawling cities, all of it hidden right under our feet. Today,
It's such a powerful and kind of haunting idea, right? That everything that has ever happened out there is still recorded, just waiting to be found.
But for millennia, that's exactly what happened. Their kings were completely erased, their cities were buried, and their languages just vanished. I mean, a whole vibrant chapter of human history was just wiped from memory, as if it never even existed.
That is, until now. Because modern archaeology, well, it's finally starting to read the clues that the desert left behind. Okay, so let's dive right into this, and we're going to start by tackling the biggest misconception, the one we all have about the Sahara.
We picture this, right? An endless, empty wasteland. But for thousands of years, the reality was this, a vibrant corridor of power. It was like a superhighway connecting the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean world and way beyond. And listen, the people who lived there, we're not talking about wandering tribes. No, way before recorded history, these were structured societies. They had all the hallmarks of advanced civilizations: social hierarchies, metalworking, huge trade networks, architecture, you name it. So where do we even begin to look for a world that's been lost for so long? Well, we start with the first mysterious clue that archaeologists stumbled upon, a structure that just defied all explanation. Deep in what's now modern-day Mali, near the shores of an ancient, long-vanished lake, there's a site called Tandadaru. You can think of it as the Stonehenge of the Sahara. It's got dozens of massive stones, some even carved with these mysterious faces and symbols we still can't decipher, all arranged in these perfect, silent circles. So the first question is the obvious one. What was this place? Could it have been some kind of massive open-air temple? A place to worship their gods under that vast desert sky?
Or was its purpose a little more somber? Maybe a sacred burial ground, marking the final resting place for their most important kings and priests.
Or was it something more scientific? I mean, could it have been a sophisticated celestial observatory? Basically a calendar made of stone, used to track the movement of the stars and the seasons? Or was it something else entirely, a monument built to declare the power and the permanence of these forgotten kings? The truth, for now, is still buried out there with them. And here's the thing, Tandadaru wasn't just some isolated wonder. As archaeologists looked closer, they started to realize it was just one piece of a vast, interconnected network of kingdoms that once completely dominated the Sahara. This just gives you a little glimpse into the sheer diversity of these cultures. Take the Chad Basin, for example, which covers parts of modern-day Chad, Nigeria, Cameroon. You had the Sal civilization. Archaeologists have found their intricate bronze armor, iron swords, these incredibly expressive terracotta statues. This wasn't some small tribe. This was a regional powerhouse with a warrior elite. And other societies were just as advanced. If you go further north, into what's now Libya, we find evidence of early mining, industrial-scale metal smelting, and these massive burial fields with thousands of stone mounds for their rulers. They were truly masters of both metal and stone.
But all of this evidence, the cities, the armor, the tombs, it's all incredible, right? But it paled in comparison to one discovery. A discovery so profound it completely rewrote what we thought we knew about these lost peoples.
The discovery was a script called Tefiniga. It's this ancient alphabet, carved on tombs, on rock walls, on ceremonial stones all across the Central Sahara, and its roots go back thousands of years. By comparing these ancient forms to modern scripts that descended from it, linguists proved one unbelievable, game-changing fact.
They could write. Just let that sink in for a second. These were not pre-literate societies. They were cultures with a written language, totally capable of recording their own history, their beliefs, their laws. This changed absolutely everything. Which, of course, brings us to the biggest question of all. If these kingdoms were so sophisticated, so powerful, and so widespread, where on earth did they go?
The answer wasn't war. It wasn't an invasion. It was something that feels, well, eerily familiar today. Climate change. A massive, catastrophic climate shift turned the once Green Sahara into the hyper-arid desert we know now. And it triggered this domino effect. First, the rain stopped. Then the rivers and lakes vanished. Trade routes collapsed. And the entire foundation of their civilization just crumbled, forcing them to scatter.
But here's the most exciting part. The same desert that erased them also preserved them. And their story is far, far from over.
Think about this number for a second. 90%. That is how much of the Sahara remains a complete mystery to archaeologists. Underneath all that sand could be anything. Lost cities, royal tombs, undiscovered scripts. We have barely scratched the surface.
Which leaves us with this final, tantalizing thought. As our technology gets better, as we learn to look deeper beneath the dunes, what other forgotten kings, what other lost civilizations are still just waiting for us to find them? The desert, after all, never forgets.
You know, some stories don't survive because they're carved in stone or written in history books. They survive as whispers, passed from one person to another across centuries of shifting sand. The legend of Zerzura, a ghost city of white walls and impossible riches, said to be lost somewhere deep in the heart of the Sahara Desert.
And really, that's the whole soul of this thing. For more than 1,000 years, the name Zerzura has been spoken in hushed tones by caravan masters, by desert tribes, and by totally obsessed explorers. It's this story that has just haunted the imagination, a ghost that simply refuses to fade away.
So, that's the big question, right? Was this a real place, or was it just a fantasy, a mirage born from the desert heat and sheer desperation? Well, let's find out. We're going to follow the clues scattered across ancient texts, modern discoveries, and the unforgiving desert itself, and see where they lead us.
Okay, so before we start digging for evidence, we need to understand the myth itself. What exactly is this legendary city that so many people have searched for? What did those whispers actually describe?
I mean, listen to this stuff. It sounds like something straight out of a fairy tale. A city with bone-white walls, where the sand itself is white. A place where palm trees are impossibly tall, and where untold treasures are just lying there, guarded by sleeping kings. It's the ultimate desert paradise, a promise of life and wealth in a place that's defined by death. So yeah, it's really no wonder people have risked everything to find it. But here's the thing. This wasn't just some campfire story. The legend of Zerzura actually has roots in historical documents, and that's what took it from the realm of pure myth and gave it this tantalizing possibility of being real. The first solid reference we have comes from a medieval Arabic text. It's called the Kitab el-Kanuz, which translates to the Book of Hidden Treasures. This right here gives the legend a historical anchor, a solid starting point for our investigation. And the description in this book is, well, it's wild. It talks about a city of birds, as white as a dove, with gates guarded by black giants, and of course, filled with unimaginable treasure. Now, this sounds like pure mythology, right? The kind of story you'd make up to keep people away. But then, the book does something totally unexpected. Tucked right alongside all that crazy stuff about giants are these incredibly specific, totally plausible details. Things like tall palm groves, marble white buildings, a freshwater oasis, and even a mention of 3 distinct kingdoms hidden away behind rocky canyons. It's these kinds of details that made explorers sit up and think, wait a minute, maybe there's something to this. And it wasn't just in that one book. For centuries, the Bedouin tribes, the people who knew the desert better than anyone, told their own stories of a hidden oasis, and their descriptions, they matched the manuscript's clues almost perfectly. A white city, lost kings, and life-giving water. When you have a written text and an oral tradition saying the same thing, that's a pretty powerful clue.
So, with these clues in hand, the modern age of exploration kicked off. In the 19th and 20th centuries, explorers became completely obsessed, mounting these massive expeditions deep into the uncharted desert. And what they found? Well, it only made the mystery even deeper. So, the first big break actually came from the sky. It's 1909, and an Egyptian prince, Kamal el-Din, is flying over this vast, flat plateau called the Gilf Kebir, and he sees something that should be impossible. A long, hidden valley with white rock walls and green vegetation. He called it a paradise hidden by rock. Could this be it? The location of Zerzura? It was this perfect natural fortress, just like the legends described. But when he finally explored it on foot, there was no city, no ruins, just hints. Hints of a place that might have existed once upon a time.
Okay, then we jump to 1933. A Hungarian explorer named Laszlo Almasi makes one of the most famous archaeological finds in the entire Sahara. He stumbles upon a cave, and it's filled with ancient paintings of people swimming. Let that sink in. People swimming in what is now one of the driest places on the entire planet. And this led Almasi to a radical new theory. He argued that Zerzura wasn't a physical place you can actually find today. Instead, he believed it was a cultural memory, a story passed down for thousands and thousands of years, preserving the memory of a time when the Sahara wasn't a desert at all, but was green and full of life.
But maybe the most compelling physical evidence, the thing that really makes you go, was found near the Egyptian-Libyan border. Explorers discovered a series of ancient tombs and burial mounds, way, way out there, far from any known civilization.
And what they found inside is what makes this a real puzzle. The human remains had features that just didn't seem to belong to the region, and they were buried with this bizarre mix of Egyptian-style artifacts and local Saharan tools. So, who were these people? An isolated kingdom? Could these be the lost kings from the legend? This discovery strongly suggested that a complex society had, in fact, existed deep in the desert. So, let's recap. We have ancient texts, explorer reports, incredible cave paintings, and mysterious tombs. How in the world do we put all this together? Well, let's dive into the 3 main theories that try to explain the legend of Zerzura. All right, theory number 1 is the most epic one. It suggests Zerzura is a memory of a real kingdom from what's called the African humid period. That was thousands of years ago when the Sahara was green. The idea is, as the climate changed and the desert spread, the survivors retreated to the very last fertile valley, which then lived on in legend long after it was finally swallowed by the sand. Now, the second theory is a little more specific. Ancient Egyptian texts talk about these distinct desert peoples, some of whom they described as having lighter skin. So it's possible that a small, isolated settlement of one of these groups managed to survive for centuries in a remote oasis, and their unique culture just grew into the myth of a lost foreign kingdom. And the third theory? It's the most practical one. For centuries, caravans crossing the Sahara were lost to sandstorms or drought or bandits. And these disasters would have left behind valuable cargo, jewels, metals, silks. So over time, stories of these real scattered treasures could have just merged together and grown into this grand legend of a single lost city of riches. So, a lost kingdom, an isolated tribe, or a legend born of treasure. Which one is it? In the end, that might not even be the most important question, because the search for Zerzura reveals something way more profound about the desert itself. And that's really the key takeaway here, because no matter where it came from, the fact that the Zerzura legend has survived for so long, that points to a deep truth about the Sahara, a truth we often forget. Zerzura is the ghost of a Green Sahara. It's the echo of a lost world. It's a powerful symbol of the civilizations that rose up and then were just erased by one of the most dramatic climate shifts in human history. The legend exists because the memory of that world was just too powerful to disappear completely. So, while the city of Zerzura might just be a myth, the history it represents is very, very real. And it leaves us with this final, incredible thought. The desert is patient. It hides its secrets well. And somewhere, buried deep beneath the sand, the true story is almost certainly still out there, just waiting to be found. What if the history of a whole civilization wasn't buried under sand, but was actually written in our own blood? Well, we're going to uncover the story of the Sahara's great ancient kingdoms. And we're not doing it with shovels, we're using cutting-edge science that can literally read the stories hidden inside our DNA. You know, when you think of the Sahara, you probably picture this vast, empty expanse, right? For thousands of years, it's been this relentless force of nature, swallowing entire cities, burying rivers, and just silencing the memory of whole civilizations. It's pretty much the ultimate eraser of history.
But what if I told you something survived all that? That there's a record, an archive, so resilient that even the endless sands of the desert couldn't bury it, couldn't destroy it?
And yeah, you guessed it. That one thing is human DNA. Long after the stone walls have crumbled into dust and the languages have been forgotten, our blood remembers. And today we can finally read what it has to say. So this is where we enter the amazing world of archaeogenetics. It's a field where scientists can read the biological signatures in ancient human remains, just like a history book. And believe me, they are uncovering a secret the desert has kept locked away for millennia. To really get this story, you have to rewind the clock. I mean, way back to a time when the Sahara wasn't a desert at all. Can you believe it? It was green. We're talking a vibrant, lush landscape full of rivers, lakes, and huge grasslands. And the DNA from the first people they found there, well, it tells a really surprising story. These weren't some isolated group. No way. They were this incredible mix of North Africans, early sub-Saharan populations, and even people related to those from the Near East. I mean, think about what that means. The Sahara wasn't a barrier separating people. It was a bridge. It was a genetic highway where people from all these different parts of the ancient world met, they mixed, and they created this unique human melting pot. And for a few thousand years, between about 9,000 and 6,000 years ago, this Green Sahara was home to a whole network of thriving communities. And we're not talking about a few scattered nomads here. These were sophisticated societies, cattle herders, fishermen, hunters, even early farmers. But then, everything started to change. The climate shifted. The rain stopped coming, the rivers dried up, and that green paradise began its slow, relentless march into the desert we know today. And this event triggered one of the most important migrations in all of human history. So let's just put this on a timeline to make sense of it. For thousands of years, these communities are just flourishing. But right around 5,000 years ago, that desertification process really kicks into high gear. It forced a massive dispersal. The people of the Sahara had no choice. They had to move. So where did they all go? Well, one huge wave of migrants headed east, making their way to the fertile banks of the Nile Valley. And the genetic evidence we have now suggests that these Saharan people were actually part of the foundational populations of ancient Egypt. Okay, then you have another group that pushed south into the regions we now know as places like Niger, Chad, and Nigeria. And down there, they merged with local farming communities, creating new cultures and passing on that unique genetic legacy. At the same time, other groups were migrating west, out towards the Atlantic coast. Their descendants would eventually play a part in building the great West African kingdoms in places like Mali and Senegal, bringing their ancient traditions with them. And finally, a fourth stream of people moved north, back up towards the Mediterranean coast. There, they mixed with Berber populations and other cultures in modern-day Libya, Tunisia, and Algeria. Their DNA was basically woven right into the genetic fabric of North Africa. So you see, the people didn't vanish, they dispersed. And their genetic echoes, their fingerprints, can be found in all these famous civilizations that came later. So let's look at some of the proof. Okay, take the Garamantes. They were a powerful kingdom that totally mastered the desert. When scientists analyzed their remains, they found this stunning genetic blend: North African Berber, Sub-Saharan African, Mediterranean, and, crucially, that ancient Saharan lineage. They weren't just a desert kingdom, they were a true crossroads civilization. And it gets even wilder. Out in the Libyan desert, archaeologists found the mummy of a child that was 5,600 years old. It was preserved with these really sophisticated techniques, and it was far older than many of the Egyptian pharaohs. This find just hints that these desert cultures were way more advanced, way earlier than we ever thought. We can even see this legacy walking around today. The Tuareg people, the masters of the modern Sahara, are kind of like living fossils. Their DNA carries this really unique marker. It's called a haplogroup that links them directly back to the ancient Saharan elites. They didn't just migrate, they adapted and endured, carrying the memory of the Green Sahara inside them. So what does this all add up to? Well, it leads to a really powerful conclusion. The story of the Sahara isn't one of a civilization that disappeared. It's a story of transformation, and its legacy, it's written right into our DNA. And this right here is the absolute heart of it. The myth is that the desert just erased these people. But the truth, the one that genetics has revealed, is that the desert simply redirected them. Their migration didn't end their story, it spread their story across the entire African continent and beyond. Their legacy is alive today in the DNA of millions of people. You can see it in cultural traditions and songs, in cattle herding practices that are still used, and even in the roots of ancient languages. The entire genetic map of Africa was fundamentally shaped by this incredible dispersal. It's just such a powerful way to think about our own bodies, isn't it? Every single genome is a time capsule. Every gene is like a tiny fossil, holding clues to this deep, epic human story. And the crazy part is, we are just getting started. As our ability to analyze ancient DNA gets better and better, we're getting closer to mapping these ancient journeys with incredible precision. We might even be able to digitally reconstruct the faces of the Sahara's lost kings and queens. So I want to leave you with this one thought. The desert took their cities, their rivers, their entire world. But it could not take their bloodline. Their story continues inside millions of us today, which really makes you wonder, what part of their incredible story do you carry?
Okay, when you think Sahara, what comes to mind? Right? Endless sand dunes, a blazing sun, just emptiness. But what if I told you that emptiness is an illusion? What if it's hiding a history so ancient, so vibrant, it's almost hard to believe? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to uncover the secrets buried deep beneath the sand.
I just love this quote. It gives you chills, doesn't it? It frames the desert not as this, dead, empty place, but as a living archive, a time capsule, just waiting, holding on to memories of rivers, lakes, and entire kingdoms that we've long forgotten.
All right, so let's start right there. Let's challenge everything we think we know about this place. We're about to peel back the layers on a landscape that is so much more than meets the eye.
Yeah, this is the image we all have in our heads. A place that feels empty, silent, totally unforgiving. You can almost feel the sun beating down, see the sharp shadows, hear that wind just whipping across the dunes. Right now, its identity is all about harshness. This overwhelming sense of emptiness. So on one hand, we have our perception, a barren wasteland. But the reality? Oh, it's something else entirely. It's like a buried library. Its pages aren't paper, they're sand and rock, and they tell these incredible stories of civilizations that were thriving long before the pyramids were even a blueprint, way before the Roman Empire was even a thought.
So the big question is, how does a place like that, a thriving green land, become the desert we see today? Well, here's the crazy part. It wasn't some slow, gradual change. Nope. It was a sudden, catastrophic climate event that literally buried an entire world.
Okay, so picture this. About 5,000 years ago, everything changed. The monsoon rains, the ones that brought life to the whole region every year, they just stopped. It's almost like someone flipped a switch. Almost overnight, rivers turned to dust. Massive lakes evaporated. Entire ecosystems just collapsed. It was the end of a world, forcing everyone to flee and leaving their cities and kingdoms to be swallowed whole by the sand. And for centuries, that's where the story ended. This whole world was just gone, hidden. But then, slowly but surely, explorers, archaeologists, they started finding things, little clues, subtle whispers on the wind of a very, very different Sahara.
And the stuff they started finding, I mean, it is just staggering. They uncovered the Garamantes, these desert kings who built whole cities supported by these mind-blowing underground aqueducts. They found Tassili, basically a prehistoric art gallery on rock walls, showing a lush savanna just crawling with giraffes and hippos. And then, get this, they found evidence of a prehistoric sea, Lake Mega Chad, that was bigger than the entire country of Germany. Every single one of these discoveries just hammers home the point. This wasn't a wasteland. It was a thriving heartland of civilization.
But finding these clues is one thing. To really understand the sheer scale of this lost world, we need to bring in the big guns. And that's where modern technology comes in. Let's take a look at how science is literally reading the desert's secrets.
Okay, this is where it feels like science fiction. Scientists are using satellite images to see the ghosts of ancient rivers from space. Rivers you can't see at all when you're standing right on top of them. They're using something called LiDAR. Think of it like radar but with lasers, to scan right through the sand and map out the forgotten cities buried beneath. They can even take ancient DNA and reconstruct the faces of the people who lived there thousands of years ago. We're watching myths and legends turn into hard scientific fact right before our eyes.
You know, uncovering all this isn't just a cool history lesson. It's so much bigger than that. The story of the Sahara really forces you to think about these huge, powerful cycles of time and life. And, maybe more importantly, it makes you wonder what massive environmental shifts could mean for us right here, right now. Which brings us to a really fascinating question, doesn't it? If the Sahara was once a green paradise, could it ever be again? Could it bloom? Well, according to climate science, the answer is yeah, a surprising, definite yes. So here's how it works. Our planet has this tiny wobble as it spins on its axis, and it completes a full wobble every 21,000 years. It's a super predictable cycle. And that little wobble is what decides where those big monsoon rains fall. The very same orbital shift that turned the Sahara into a desert is eventually going to reverse itself. So yeah, in the pretty distant future, the rains are predicted to come back. The desert could become a green, thriving cradle of life all over again. It just goes to show you, history really does move in giant cycles.
So, in the end, what does the desert remember? It remembers that nothing is truly lost forever. It's just hidden. It shows us that even when entire civilizations disappear, their echoes, their stories, they stick around. That silence you imagine in the desert, it's not emptiness. It's memory. And it leaves you with one final thought, right? What other incredible histories are lying just beneath the surface of the world that we all think we know so well?